Quake 4 was released on. Wait, what about Quake 3? Well, I said I wasn't going to review Quake 3 in my Quake 1 review, but looking at Quake Champions without at least glancing at 3 would be pretty disjointed. So come on, let's take a look at id's final game release of the 90s. Quake 3 was released on December 2nd, 1999, and it is the essence of the arena shooter, boiled down to only the very essentials. And that's about all I have to say about it. Yeah, this is why I didn't plan on talking about Quake 3, because it doesn't have anything noteworthy in it. It's simply id putting all their efforts into the PvP aspect of previous games, rather than a story campaign of any kind. Every single component of Quake 3 has been tuned to facilitate lightning fast deathmatch. Every single number, every single bit of map geometry, every single option in the menus, it all feeds back into the core design of the game. As much as I love other id games, I don't think it'd be wrong to say that Quake 3 is their tightest designed game period, which is refreshingly good to hear after Quake 2 sucked big gorilla dick. Also, I have to compliment the return to more surreal and strange level designs like the first Quake. After seeing Quake 2 try and move towards a generic sci-fi look, it's good to see id anchor the series back to where it belongs. Let's hope we don't go back off the rails one game later. Well, that's all I really have to say about Quake 3. The game's only slightly younger than I am, so it doesn't have much of an online community anymore. I wasn't able to find anyone to play it with, so my playtime in 3 wasn't much more than grabbing footage for the review here. Oh yeah, there's also Quake Live. Quake Live started as a web browser version of Quake 3, and it had a decent sized community for many years, along with frequent updates. Though between the lack of innovation and no mod support, it's not surprising that Live eventually went the way of the dinosaurs. Anyways, that about covers everything about Quake 3 without a history lesson, so let's get on to the main event. Oh, and one more thing. Sorry about the video quality here. Trying to record Quake 4 is a massive pain in the ass. I had a lot of trouble setting up the ability to even get footage with this review, because Quake 4 and the id Tech 4 engine does not like OBS. So I had to do some weirdo shit to get the footage for this review, so it's kinda lower quality than usual. Quake 4 is released on October 18th, 2005, a near 6-year gap on from the release of Quake 3. Unlike previous games, this one wasn't developed by id Software, but they did oversee its development. The bulk of the game was instead handled by Raven Software. The game was developed on the id Tech 4 engine, the very same used to power Doom 3. I think I'll go more into the engine when I get to Doom 3, but it certainly brings its characteristic look to Quake 4. So we have a 6-year gap, a new developer, and a new engine. How does Quake 4 compare to its predecessors, and how does it stand on its own? Quake 4 is an immediate sequel to Quake 2, taking place right after the defeat of the Macron at the end of that game. After taking out the Strogg leader, humanity is set on finishing the job. You play as Matthew Kane, corporal in the military and now a member of the Rhino Squad. You get sent down to Strogos on a drop pod, and just like Quake 2, you end up crash landing. Though unlike Bitterman from Quake 2, Matthew is lame as fuck and can't get up for a while. But after he finally comes to, you begin to follow your orders. And that's about it. Quake 4's story is just as by the numbers as Quake 2's story. You get a series of objectives to complete and you go and do them. Levels do a better job of showing you the objectives than Quake 2's did, but there's not much to talk about. It's like Quake 2 in that it's more of a series of events plot, and the events aren't very interesting. It even ends with another fight against another Macron, like they just had another on standby after the first one died. Granted, he doesn't go down like a complete chump, but it's still a mediocre end to cap the campaign off with. Something I did like in the campaign though was the little break in the middle when you get to go to your command ship, the Hannibal. You get to come back to this place twice, and it's a nice break from the normal gameplay. You get to hang around the place and see the little conversations the crew members are having with each other. This kind of stuff is something I really like in games, so it's nice Quake 4 could fit it into the campaign. There is one good moment at the middle of the campaign, however, I would be remiss to ignore. You and your squad are given a mission to infiltrate an area known as the Tetra Node, which sends instructions to all Strogg in the area, and your objective is to disable it with an EMP. While inside the Tetra Node, you end up getting captured by the Macron and sent to the facility that turns humans into more Strogg. And you get a first-hand showcase of how this is done, strapped to an operating table on an assembly line. It's a good moment of show don't tell, and even has ramifications on gameplay. Now, you don't end up fighting humanity for the Strogg. Instead, you get saved in the middle right before the mind control is activated, and you get to play the remainder of the campaign as a rogue Strogg. Other than that good moment though, Quake 4 plays out just as you would expect. So let's move on to presentation. Our return to Stroggos after a 6-year interim from Quake 2 is a hell of a jump. Forget colored lighting, now we got real-time lighting. Levels are visually far more complex and usually do a better job of showing you what your objective is or where you're at. Of course, Stroggos is still Stroggos, a brown-gray dump you wouldn't even throw your trash in, and Quake 4 does very little to try and make Stroggos any more interesting than Quake 2 did. You have some areas that have a nice change of color or the occasional visual set piece that sets things up nicely, but it's mostly the same boring place we left off after Quake 2. I know the game's an immediate sequel to Quake 2, but I think some more effort into livening Stroggos up would have been nice. I mean, at least not in the literal way Quake 4 does. While the Strogg have always had a biomechanical theme to them, you see a much grosser, deeper realization of those themes in Quake 4. Amputated bodies hooked up to computers, organ pipes flowing with blood and who knows what else, fleshy health chargers on the wall, and more nasty shit is everywhere in Quake 4, especially towards the end game. Also, I want to give a special mention to the Tetra Node and the Nexus levels. These were my favorite areas of the game visually. The Tetra Node has a really cool contrast to the constant orange-brown of Stroggos, offering a cool blue and black aesthetic instead. It's a good place to put in the middle of the campaign after the player gets tired of the constant dull colors. And the final level of the campaign, the Nexus, has a really nice aesthetic with these slanted orange glows on the wall of the darker areas. It's just something that kinda hits that strange and surreal Quake itch for me. Well, if there's one complaint I can level at Quake 4's presentation though, it is the awful textures. I don't know if there's something wrong with my copy, because it can't seriously look like this. I made sure to set the game to the maximum settings too before I started playing, so it's nothing to do with graphic options. Regardless, the terrible textures on most models took a good bit away from the visuals of the game, and they really don't look any better than Quake 2's textures. Conversely, textures on computer screens and such are very sharp, which looks so strange when put with the terrible muddy filtered textures everything else has. Well, the textures might not be any better than Quake 2, but the sound certainly is. I really have to commend the gun sound specifically. Guns in Quake 4 feel fantastic to fire, just incredibly meaty and powerful. Even the little pistol packs a punch like a haymaker from a gorilla. Enemies are also a lot easier to recognize based on sound, so discerning threats is easier than Quake 2, despite the darkness of Quake 4. Environments also have some good ambience, and when things pick up in a fight, it sounds suitably chaotic. Shame about the music though. Nothing here is bad, but I don't remember any of the tracks either. I found Quake 2 had the more memorable soundtrack, but that might just be the fact that every track in that game looped after 60 seconds. Quake 4 continues the trend Quake 2 started of slowing down gameplay speed. Your character's movement is just slow enough to be frustrating when you're faced with a large room, or a lot of backtracking, which happens a lot in this game. Not helping that is, unlike Quake 2, you don't get a run button. Instead, you get a walk button. A walk button? Who makes this shit? Ugh. Also, another unfortunate addition to the Quake formula in this game is reloading. Now, I should say that clip sizes in this game are very large for the most part, but I still think adding reloads to Quake was a poor decision, even if it was downplayed. Though, you're not the only one who's been slowed down. You are in a war after all, and you actually have backup this time. You'll spend the better part of the campaign accompanied by a rotating selection of Space Marines. While I usually prefer being alone in single-player games, I don't mind the tag-alongs here. For one, they stomp out enemies in the early game, their aim is solid and their guns are powerful. Also, the medic and engineer class soldiers can heal your health and armor if you get low, so companions in Quake actually work decently. Shame about the movement speed, but I guess we're all slow on Stragos. As for the planet's inhabitants, the Strog have seen very little changes since Quake II, which makes sense in the story. Most of the enemy roster is made up of returning foes, but you have a couple of new faces, and the occasional boss. I don't really have much to say about the returning enemies, because I'd just be repeating myself from the Quake 2 review. They feel the same to fight, minus that dumbass dodge and place move they did for some reason. Instead, the Strog now do backflips. Also, I'm glad to say that their AI is much better this time. While the Strog sometimes lack situational awareness, they usually can follow you around levels just fine, and the same goes for your squad mates. Now, of course, the Strog are only as powerful as your guns are, so what's the arsenal this time? Well, mostly returning weapons. The pistol and shotgun return will thankfully increase the damage, and the pistol even more thankfully shoots bullets now, while also retaining its infinite ammo. The assault rifle is also back, feeling better to fire but just as powerful. Same for the rocket launcher, hyper blaster, and railgun. The grenade launcher is here again, but sadly it didn't benefit from the jump. Easily the worst weapon in the game now, and it wasn't even good in Quake 2. Guess it just wasn't meant to be. It's not all old weapons, however. It's also even older weapons. The nail gun makes a triumphant return after its previous absence. While it's not as powerful as the super nail gun from Quake 1, this version of the classic weapon can still put the nails in the coffin of anyone who doesn't show you the respect you deserve. Another returning favorite is the lightning gun, sporting a slick design and a plasma stream of damage that manages to be even more satisfying to fire than the original from the first game. It even gets the ability to arc its lightning to multiple targets, which was a scrapped feature from the first Quake. And finally, we do have one new toy to play with. Forget the decrepit BFG from Quake 2, the super weapon for this game is the Dark Matter gun. Plasma is so last year, why don't we just start chucking black holes around? Of course, doing so is just as powerful as you'd expect, so be careful with the ammo on this thing. You wouldn't want to run dry when you need it. Or just hoard it all for the final boss and delete the stupid bastard in a minute like I did. Overall, a solid weapon lineup. The grenade launcher is certainly a weak link, but I'm glad to say that every other weapon fills its role nicely, and man do they feel great to use. I said it before, but I'll say it again, the guns in this game are meatier than the Strog's computer, and I'm glad to say that Quake 2's poor lineup has been redeemed. If there's one thing I do actually miss from Quake 2, however, it'd be the inventory system. Being able to hold power-ups for free use was a really cool addition, and it's a shame you can't do that here. Actually, power-ups in their entirety are gone from the campaign. It's really weird to think that the series that made quad damage, one of the most iconic power-ups in gaming, doesn't even have quad damage in it. At least outside of the multiplayer. We might not have power-ups, but the new drivable vehicles act as a poor marine substitute. A hover tank, a mech, a tram, if there's one thing the various vehicle sections in Quake 4 all have in common, it's that they are fucking boring. A lack of interesting set pieces really hurts these, and it's less an epic battle to your destination, and more like a 4-hour commute in traffic. Something these large and empty vehicle sections really make me miss is the exploration in Quake 1 and 2. Something cool about those games was taking a thorough look through levels to find various goodies, and Quake 2 really elevated that with permanent health boosted storable power-ups. And something truly baffling is that Quake 4 was poised to make this exploration even more rewarding, but dropped the ball right at the finish line.
Hey, it's that Kane guy.
Damn, are we lucky to see you. We're the last of Cobra Squad. That door is the exit out, but we can't get through the security scanner.
Yeah, it fried Private Johnson when he tried to go through.
I analyzed the scanning circuits. All they're looking for is proper Strog ID codes.
Wouldn't Kane have those codes? He looks pretty Strog to me.
Yeah, I bet they do.
How about it, Kane? You want to try walking through? It should read you as Strog.
Let me see that rocket launcher. Here,
Now, if you hold scope after you fired a rocket, you can guide it where you want it to go. It's great for shooting around cover.
During the game, your squad mates give you several upgrades to your weapons. A doubled clip for the assault rifle and nail gun, arcing electricity from the lightning gun, an instant reload for the shotgun, homing nails, and more. Wouldn't it have made more sense to spread these upgrades around in levels for players to find? It had been super rewarding to gain these by looking around, but there's almost nothing to find but the occasional armor pickup. Not even the adrenaline item from Quake II returns, and there's only one point in the game where you get a health increase. Oh, and back on the subject of vehicles, man, what happens to the movement when you're piloting them? Now, I should say that on-foot movement has improved from Quake 2, as you can actually go down fucking slopes correctly again, but vehicles really shit the bed. The hover tank has the tendency to get magnetized against walls, and the mech walker has to slow to a stop before it can change the direction it's moving, which feels awful in gameplay. Oh, and whenever you hit a slope with the hover tank, the aim jerks around and it's almost nauseating to aim at things, which is doubled by the fact that you spend a lot of the section in an aqueduct with slanted sides. Ugh, just turn it off. Back on the positives though, something I can appreciate of Quake 4 is the game's solid difficulty. I played on the game's normal mode, and while the campaign started off really easy, I found the later areas of it to be a solid challenge, and there are some pretty suspenseful fights towards the end of the game. I also really like the mid-game switch up after Matthew Kane gets strogged up. The 25 increase to your health and armor is a nice cushion for the higher damage enemies that become very common late in the game, and being able to take health from these wall chargers is nice as well. The best part, however, is the permanent movement speed increase you receive. Thank God. It doesn't stop the backtracking from being tedious, but it at very least helps it. And after going through my footage for this review, it's hard to believe just how slow you start the game moving. The best way I can describe Quake 4 is just as a better version of Quake 2. It had some less than well executed ideas, but most of it is a lot more solid than the last single player outing of the series. It's a decent enough shooter, if not the Quake game I've wanted since Quake 1. Being honest, the biggest issue of Quake 4 isn't with the game itself, but rather when you compare it to what the industry had to offer by 2005. First-person shooter games with great single-player campaigns were much more common by Quake 4's release. Half-Life 2, Halo 2, Fear, Metroid Prime, and more had come out in the 6 years since Quake 2. Quake's competition had not only caught up, but had surpassed it in every way. And while Quake 4 has some improvements on Quake 2, it feels like it's all in a vacuum, disconnected from the gaming world at large. It's no surprise that Quake 4 would be the last mainline entry in the series for over a decade. The series had not only regressed from its origin of Quake 2, but had failed to catch up to current releases after over a half-decade gap. While Quake 3 kept the multiplayer deathmatch spirit of the classic games alive for some years longer, even it would fade away with the march of time. Ultimately, Quake 4 failed to make any real impact in the long term. It's a better game than Quake 2, but you're safe to skip this one as well.